I'm here today to talk about obviously the process of bathroom design. Just a slight introduction. Obviously, my name's Tameka Moffat. We run Tameka Moffat Designs. We're a Sydney-based studio. We have a diverse range of portfolio of works ranging from residential, commercial and the hospitality sectors.
But you term now.
I was raised in a family of builders, developers and real estate agents. So I grew up from a very, very young age. So the housing industry was always going to be an area that I was going to lead into. I remember my dad was in real estate, so most weekends we were spent viewing houses, open homes. So that gave me the opportunity to be able to view lots of different layouts and lots of different aesthetics in a home, opposed to our own home environment. So it was always, as I said, it was always going to be an easy progression for me to go into the building or real estate industry. My first job, which was over 30 years ago, was at Beechwood Homes back in the early 80s. Back then, plans were, and most of the housing plans were all pretty much 2D developed. There was no really 3D images or 3D renders back at that stage. So the plans were always 2D, so you had to learn very early on to actually envision that space and create a 3D model in your mind about that from that 2D plan. So I feel that gave me a great skill set moving forward in the industry to be able to understand plans correctly and the spatial development of the plan. So that set me up very well moving forward into the building industry and design industry. Just a little bit of an introduction back into how we've evolved over the years, the bathrooms through the ages. Obviously, back in the 60s, the colours were very overdone with pairings and patterns, and the vanities were commonplace to be a tiled vanity in these bathrooms back in the 60s. Swirling patterns with bright colours were the norm. Very, very saturated, hydrated colours, bright reds, bright yellows, bright oranges, and whatnot, paired with quite often brown mosaics, as you can see in the first image. In the 70s, this is when I grew up, so my bathroom was very similar to the first one, where we actually paired a lot of the actual finishes with the basins and the baths, and the actual toilets would tended to be all around the one colour. They may have been something like this avocado green paired with a nice brown tile. Back in the 70s, probably the most offensive design trend known to humankind was the introduction of carpet in the bathrooms. It would never be seen today. It was completely unhygienic and not overly functional, but at the end of the day, that was back in the day when the war had just finished and carpet was seen as a luxury. So people thought it was a great idea to integrate it into the bathrooms. Warm underfoot, they often had it on the toilet lid to cover the toilet lid as well, but as I said, not overly functional and not the most hygienic design. Moving into the 80s, we tended to start to tone it down a little bit. Still added some colour on the walls and floors and whatnot, but again, you've seen more of some neutral colours starting to creep in and toning down those highly saturated areas. Moving on to the bathrooms of today, obviously they've evolved quite a bit. The walls can now these days not have to be tiled, they can be tile-free, they can be a render finish, a V-groove board, painted finish to keep the cost down a little bit and whatnot, but it gives it a little bit more of a overall calming aesthetic. Stone bench tops are quite popular, and stone baths and solid surface materials, as well as freestanding baths if the space allows. In the 2010s, this is when we introduced the idea of turning bathrooms into a spa-like experience. Self-care was obviously really starting to take off, and the treat-yourself mentality had started to creep in. People wanted to pamper themselves. This was really prominent during COVID. A lot of bathroom renovations were carried out during COVID. People wanted to actually feel relaxed in the space. They couldn't go out and visit day spas anymore or beauty salons or whatever, so they were trying to incorporate that feeling in their own home. Colour psychology plays a huge part in the modern design. More of the mainstream sort of materials coming in are obviously your natural materials, your light colour, and you're more of like your earthy tones, just to create that spa-like experience. In these two bathrooms here, this is quite a good design. We quite often use this in our designs. You'll see there's a freestanding bath in front of a nib wall. Hidden behind that nib wall is the toilet and the shower area. We use this a lot in our designs to create a separate space within the bathroom. But just because you've got the large space, it doesn't mean you actually have to have a big square space with everything located on the walls. You can have separate areas in that space and provide a dividing wall, which you can tile around and hide the toilet or hide the shower behind that. When we're designing bathrooms, the first thing we actually start off with is the layout. we often advise clients to go and select your tapware and your finishes and your tiles and whatnot. They always quite often come to you with a certain design aesthetic, where they're after a certain colour or finish tapware, a certain tile they like, something they've seen on social media, Pinterest, Instagram, whatever. But at the end of the day, the main point we start with is the layout. Whether that be a renovation or a new build, the layout is the most important aspect of the actual bathroom design. These days, actually, because the bathroom's used by every single family member in the home, so it's a well-used space and it needs to be well considered and well thought out. So when we're looking at the layout, the main thing we actually take into consideration is how you will use that space, how many people will be using that space, and how that space is best utilised. So if the space permits, as I said before, we quite often like to present an area that is not necessarily an area for the vanity or the toilet that is not actually in the one space. That if you're in the bathroom and you're wanting to relax and have a soak in the bath, you've got kids knocking on the door, they want to go to the toilet, at least if that's in a designated space or somewhere not in that shower or bath area, you feel like you can actually have a bath in peace and have a long soak without being interrupted. So plan for future use of the space. This is a big thing, because if it's your forever home and you've just built and it's a new build and you plan to be in that home for a long time, you want to be planning for, if you have small children, by the time they turn into teenagers and early adults. In our case, we actually have an older son that's married, they move back for a little while. So you want to be planning throughout the ages for the age of your home. That means, for example, you can see here in the image there's a couple of options for your bath. You've got a freestanding bath and a built-in. The freestanding is great. And it's great if you have a lot of space and you've got a lot of space surrounding, but if you've got little ones and young children, you might find the built-in bath is actually a little bit more practical, where you can sit on the edge of the bath, you've got your hob to store your toys, you've got somewhere to sit while you're washing the children and whatnot. As you can see, the freestanding bath, unless you've actually got a shelf or a stool or something beside it, there's not actually a lot of area around the space that's actually usable. Moving on, as I said, sticking with the layouts, basically at the end of the day, the toilet's a big feature in the actual bathroom. If it's your main focal point you see as you enter the bathroom, we always try within bathroom design for your toilet not to be your main focal point, for that to either be a nice freestanding bath or a vanity with a beautiful mirror and whatnot in lieu of your toilet. Sometimes you can't get around that if it's a renovation and the toilet becomes the main focal point. If that does, as in this first image, or in a powder room, for example, when entering the room, try and use an in-wall cistern if the space allows. If it's a new build, if it's a renovation and you don't have the cavity space in the wall to provide an in-wall cistern, you have to use your back-to-wall or standard inlet toilet, then try and actually create something in the room that's actually a feature or a focal point. And that may be some storage above, some nice lighting or whatnot. But this is an example of an in-wall cistern. So on a new build, this has to be built into the wall, so there has to be a space in the cavity in the wall, at least 150, 200 deep, to house that mechanism of the in-wall cistern and the push plate. But as you can see, it's slightly a little bit nicer aesthetic if that's the main focal point in your room or a powder room as you enter. Trigger sprays, which are making a comeback. We're just in the moment of designing a home that has 4 of these trigger sprays, which is the little mechanism next to the toilet. It's in lieu of the bidet, where you don't have to have 2 toilets or whatnot in the space. So these trigger sprays are making a little bit of a comeback. When renovating or the new build, the biggest thing to consider is your electrical layout and your plumbing layout. If it's a new build, obviously you've got room to move with moving walls and moving fixtures and whatnot. If you're renovating and you're wanting to keep everything within the space, your fixtures are already there and set out, you must use those fixtures. So if it's a back-to-wall inlet or a bottom inlet, then you need to just replace that actual piece with that system to make it more cost-effective. So sometimes you don't have a lot of room to move with your layout of your room. As I said, if it's a renovation, you're just wanting to make it the best you possibly can for the most cost-effective. As you can see in the second image, behind that tiled wall is actually the toilet. This is an ensuite, so behind the wall is a toilet. You don't see it a lot of the time. It's the ensuite. It's for the master ensuite. Mainly the occupants are the ones only using it. So when it's tucked behind a wall there's a good option to you just use that as a standard toilet, a back-to-wall or bottom inlet, save some cost and spend the money somewhere else in the bathroom or in a powder room downstairs where people are going to use. You're selecting your tapware and your finishes. So once you've got the layout right, you always still have a vision going into the actual design as to what colour tapware you wish to use and what colour finishes you wish to use. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of new finishes out at the moment, and some people are drawn to, say, the brushed brass or the aged brass sort of tapware. That's great if that's what you like and you want to use that for consistency throughout your home. Just bear in mind, if you're using that for a renovation or if your home is for resale, a lot of people actually may not actually like that finish of tapware. So you may be wanting to go with something a little bit more standard, like a brushed platinum, which is a slightly toned down chrome, a black or whatnot, or something that has longevity throughout the process of the home. Just bearing in mind when you are choosing your tapware, if it is a different finish, such as a brushed brass or a rose gold, try and always pair your accessories with that tapware. And that may be in the way of a strip drain, as you can see this one here. This is actually a strip drain. You can either use a strip drain with a tile insert that has the centre taken out and it's tiled, so you don't actually see as much of the drain, a linear grill, or if it's just a centre floor waste. But try and always pair that with the actual fixtures of your showers and your accessories in the bathroom. So there's a couple of different finishes on your tapware. When we're selecting tapware with clients, sometimes we have the question asked as to why is this tapware more expensive than the other. It is a brand thing, but it has a lot to do with the actual finish of the tapware. So again, if you're renovating or if it's for your forever home, there's a difference in the price when it comes to tapware, and that comes to do with the finish. So the difference is the PVD versus the electroplated. So the PVD, it is actually a physical vapour deposition, and it refers to a thin film it's a deposited technique where the solid material is vaporised in a vacuum environment and deposited on substrates as a pure material or an ally composition coating. So that's where the material is actually in the coating, in the actual mechanism, in the actual material. Electroplated is where that material, that tapware for example, is dipped into electroplating tank and it is just actually coated. So that's a big difference. You can feel that a little bit in the quality of the tapware when you're feeling the tapware. Also too, a lot of your brushed brass and your rose gold tend to be electroplated for that reason, whereas your gunmetals and your matte blacks and whatnot tend to be more of your PVD finish. So when you're looking at your tapware, if there's a difference in price, ask about the actual finish of the tapware and that material and how that tap has been finished. We use the PVD a lot in automotive. We use it a lot in commercial environments where there's a harsher cleaning product, so there's no tarnishing on the tapware and whatnot. So that's the difference between your finishes, and that may be the difference in your price. Again, going back to your renovating, you may want to save some money on a standard bath, a standard toilet and whatnot, and spend a little bit more on your tapware. Save a little bit on your tiles and spend a little bit more on your tapware because it's for the longevity of the home. When we're designing our fresco bathrooms outside, we always use 316 marine grade stainless steel finish, especially on the coast because of corrosion and whatnot. There's a couple of companies now that are bringing out the 316 marine grade instead of just stainless steel. It still is 316, but it's in a matte black or a different finish. So if you've used that throughout your home, you can tend to pair that outside as well for that continuity. Lighting is super important in your bathrooms. Tend to always, if you can in your bathroom, always tend to try and include a window or a vented skylight, which is good for ventilation, and just take into consideration what natural lighting you actually have in the room. Ambient lighting is really good over your vanity, where you may have a pendant or a wall sconce, or the mirror may be backlit. This comes into play with applying makeup, so you have face height lighting, but it's also really important to have overhead lighting, as in an LED downlight and whatnot in your room, and make sure you have ample lighting. Powder rooms. Powder rooms are a really important area in the home. Quite often the powder room is located, if you have a 2-story, for example, the powder room is located on the ground floor for easy access for guests, or it may be off a kitchen or entertaining area. With the powder room, it's a smaller room in the home, so you don't need as much storage as such, like a typical vanity. A lot of the time it is just for a feature of washing your hands and using the bathroom. So we tend to use a lot more accent lighting in these rooms rather than bright sort of downlights as such. You still need a downlight, but you may only need one in the space. And as long as you've got some nice ambient lighting, such as a pendant or a wall sconce, it just creates that atmosphere in the room. So with your as I said, with your powder rooms, you don't tend to need to have functionality as in drawers and a vanity as such. It's more of a high-end finish. You can pack a punch in this room because it is the area that most guests or visitors will use in your home. Guests won't come to your home and ask to go up and use your ensuite. That's mainly for you to be able to, personalise how you wish to. That's somewhere if you want to. If you're renovating or if you're using a standard feature and you love an aged brass tapware but you don't want to use it throughout your own home, you can use it somewhere like in the ensuite, that it's its own identity and away from the rest of the home. It still will have continuity if you use the same tiles and finishes. So don't be scared to mix your tapware, but as long as it's in a separate room or it's not in the same room, and change your actual, if you use the same finishes in that same room. Tapware and showers, this is an important feature. So there's many, many different showers on the market today. The first one you can see is just a standard rail shower. So that's where there's a shower on a rail. You can change the height. The mixer's on the back wall. That's obviously a double shower, which you can't see in the other one. So that's obviously, that's just your standard rail shower. The second image is a combination where you actually have an overhead shower and a shower on the rail also. This is really good. We use this a lot in kids' bathrooms. So when the children aren't wanting to have the overhead, they can take the handheld off and wash themselves. The handheld is really good. The rail shower is really good for cleaning the space. I know lots of people that wash their dogs in the bathroom and they can use the handheld shower to wash the dogs and whatnot. You'll notice with that one, there's just one standard mixer on the wall. So the mixer actually operates the mechanism, but on the actual rail at the back, see the button at the top? That's the actual pin, which is a diverter. So when it's a double shower like this, the diverter is normally on the back rail. You turn the mixer on at the wall, and then you turn the diverter if you want the water coming out of the rail or you want it coming out of the overhead. In the third image, that's what we classed as a flush mount ceiling shower. So that's where it's flush into the ceiling. And they also have a handheld shower, as you can see, which is really good for practicality. Again, it's at that height where it's easy to wash yourself. Couple of mixers on the wall there. That may also operate another system, but they would only need the two there. Flush mount is great. When it's flush, you need to have really good ventilation in that room because it is very close to the ceiling. And you have to be mindful of your ceiling height. If you've got a 2.7 high ceiling and the shower is flush mount, you're not going to get overly a lot of water falling on you, which is obviously the use of the handheld there. The third one is just your standard wall shower with your shower coming out of the wall with your rose, and they also have a rail shower. In that fourth image there, I'll talk about it in a minute, but they have a shelf in the shower. You can see in the second image we have a niche. I'll discuss that in a moment, but just be mindful of where you're placing your niches and your shelves in your shower. As you can see in that fourth image, they've had to place the rail shower quite high to accommodate the shelf. So young children would not be able to reach that rail shower, for example. It is quite high. If you pull it down, the hose will be sitting over the shelf. So that comes back to the functionality and the design of the room and the function of the room and the layout of the room. So there's also another shower in there that I haven't shown, which is your ceiling dropper, which is very similar to your one on the wall there. Comes in a 200 arm or a 300 arm. Again, be mindful of your ceiling height when you're designing that room. You want at least 2.1 metres to the bottom of your shower rose, whether that be on the wall or coming from the ceiling. So if there's one that only has a 200 dropper and it's still too high, you may need to increase the length of your ceiling arm. Going into your vanities and your tapware, for example. So with the vanities, the inclusion of full height vanities, floating vanities and full height mirrors, it creates the sense of space and also makes the space feel larger. So we use that second image there, that's one of our projects just recently. So as you can see, it's a full height shaving cabinet, mirrored shaving cabinet. This creates space in the room. The actual operable areas of the shaving cabinet are only on each end, so the mirror is in the centre, so you don't have a line in between you when you're actually trying to apply makeup or whatnot, and that's your full fixed mirror in the centre. This is also backlit. The light's not on at the moment, but it has an LED strip underneath which gives you that face height lighting, and there's also downlights above. So that when you're taking into consideration your vanity design, you need to first choose your basin and your tapware. So your basins, it's a couple of options. The first image shows an undermount basin. This is where the basin sits under the stone or the vanity top as such and is integrated. The second is a semi-inset where it's half cut into the stone and half sits down. There is another one where it sits on the top as a basin mount. And the third one is actually integrated into the stone. So in the first image, when you're considering your basin height, the biggest thing is to set your tapware height to start with, and your basin height and your vanity height will need to incorporate that. So generally your tapware is always set at about 1050 high, your tapware for your actual basins. As you can see in the first image, that's a basin spout with two standard taps where you have a hot and a cold mechanism. The second image is called a pin lever, and what that is you still have the spout over the basin, but you have the one mixer. Now with that, how you operate that is you actually pull the pin towards you, which creates the amount of flow. So you either pull it towards you slowly and it creates a slow dribble of flow, pull it towards you faster and it increases the flow. Left to cold, hot to right. Always centre your spout when it comes to your tapware. If you have a pin mixer like that, always centre your spout over the centre of your basin. And just be mindful when you're choosing your tapware, with the set out of your basin, when you're choosing the size of your basin, the centre of your waste generally is where your spout will sit, in the centre of the waste of that basin. It's really important when you're looking, normally we use a 200 ml spout to hit that centre waste. Sometimes there may be taps that are only 125, 150, and it may hit the back of the basin and actually splash up. So that comes into the layout and the functionality, the design of the room. The third image is actually a hob mixer. These are proven really popular for aesthetics and a really nice minimal aesthetic. One thing to consider here is it is a progressive hob mixer, so there's no pin as such and there's no levers as such. It is a little bit harder for young children to use, especially with soap on their hands. Elderly people or people with arthritis, it's quite hard to actually turn the pin. Now with a progressive mixer, they may look great, but one thing you need to consider is you can't actually control the flow of the progressive mixer. In the second one where you'll see the pin, as I spoke, you actually pull the pin out to control the flow. With a progressive mixer, you need to turn it to make it hot, obviously, and the hotter you turn it, the faster that tap will actually go. So unless you have a controlled device that actually reduces the flow, to turn your tap to fully hot, it is quite a strong flow. So that's one pros and cons when it comes to the progressive mixer. Pedestal basins, for example, these are often used in powder rooms or commercial environment where you don't need a lot of storage as such. Obviously, this is where form is over function. The form looks fantastic. It's a beautiful aesthetic piece in the room, nice architectural piece. But again, it's not overly functional. You wouldn't use this in a child's bathroom as such. There's really nowhere to store your taps or your hand towel. That can be hung on the back wall. But again, at the end of the day, requires a little bit more cleaning because there is a little bit more dripping and whatnot when you're washing your hands. You can imagine your kids in there when they're trying to wash their Play-Doh and whatnot, the mess in that room. Again, 3 different types of tap here, pin mixer at the start, floor mounted at the bottom. It has your progressive mixer at the top. So again, quite hard to actually turn. There is no handle. And your mixer on a plate for the third image. Talking about your niches and your shower shelves, we use them in probably nearly every bathroom we design. It's just a matter of your layout of your room and your size of your room and your personal preference if you prefer a niche or a shelf, or you may use nothing at all and use a standard shelf accessory attached to the wall. In the first image, you'll see this is a niche, as I was talking about before. You have to actually allow in the wall cavity at least 120 to 150 for the finished depth of that niche. So you just have to consider when you've got your studs and then you use your villa board and your gyprock, you're needing to allow 20 mil onto your stud finish for what you want for your internal. So you need to allow at least 150 for a, say, 130, 120 internal finish. And you don't want anything under 120 because your shampoo bottles and whatnot will be falling off that shelf. So 120 is a really practical depth. In the second image there, you will see they have a shelf or a ledge as such. This is a really nice contemporary aesthetic where you don't actually notice it so much, especially if it's done in the same tile. You can use a feature tile above it to create a little bit of a feature of that shelf and give it depth and definition. But at the end of the day, we use this shelf a lot. You need to build the wall out 150 for a 120 finish, and we normally like to finish them at a 1200 height, which works really well with a 600 by 1200 tile because it's coming through at that finished shelf height. The handheld shower there is at a really good position, at a really good height. It's functional for everyone to be able to use, and they've got their ceiling arm. That ceiling arm there, depending on from this image, I'd probably tend to drop that maybe another 100 mil, just so you've got a little bit more, you're a little bit closer to your shower head. The third image gives you an example of the other image I showed previously, where they've designed the shower shelf, but because they've got an all-in-one rail and an overhead shower system, you can see the hose sits over the actual mitered edge. Over time, this may wear because that mitered edge on a tile is quite sharp. You also notice with that one, they've actually cut the shower screen over the shelf. So, which is great. Over time, you do have to worry a little bit about waterproofing in that area. If possible, and if you've got the room, I always like to provide the shelf or the wall on the left, as in this middle image. That way the shower screen can sit flush into the wall. The hose isn't compromised by the shelf and whatnot. So this is again going back to your function and your layout of your room and your design of your room prior to buying your tapware. With the aesthetics these days, as I said, going back before, we're looking at more natural materials, neutral sort of colour palettes. You can create a difference with depth and definition with a feature tile. It doesn't have to be a different colour. It can be a textured tile, such as what's shown on the back wall of this shower. As you can see, they've got a skylight above, so it gives great light in to create a difference of a different depth and definition and the texture on the wall in that room, and still works really well within the space. The second image shows these days we're using a lot of curves in bathrooms and whatnot. This creates a really good functional element where there's no shower screen required, so there's not as much cleaning. It's a privacy area as well that's hidden away from the rest of the bathroom, and using a small Kit Kat tile, you can actually get the curve and the shape and the aesthetic of that room. Moving on now, I'll give you a quick brief insight into how we design our bathrooms and the process. So virtually at the end of the start of the process, whether it's a new build or a renovation, we always conduct our client meeting. Prior to that client meeting, we like our clients to actually have a bit of a design style that they prefer and an aesthetic and a colour palette that resonates with them. So when we actually first get the plans, quite often we do a full home design. So we come in at very, very early concept stage when the architect or building designer has actually just started the basic floor plan. This is a great time to be involved because we can have a look at the layout of the room and move anything around that we need to, or when we've been given the client's brief, if they want a separate area for a shower or toilet or whatnot, that's when this is incorporated into the plan. Obviously, obtain the client brief. This is really important to listen to their brief and listen to their budget. They will have a budget allocated for the project, whether it's renovation or new build, and it's important you work within those parameters and trying to stick to that budget. At the moment with COVID, it's a little bit tricky with pricing. Everything has increased by at least 20 to 30%. So if they had their build costed going back 6-12 months ago, things may have been changed and need to be requoted based on that. Obviously, then we go into the floor plan development. As you can see, this is a basic floor plan and elevations. So this is working out the floor plan and the layout of the room. Obviously, by this stage, we've started to select the tapware and select the tiles. You can see there's a large 600 by 1200 used on the walls. They wanted an undermount basin with a hob mixer. And as you can see, this was a duplex project. So it is quite a small space. It is an ensuite, but there was 2 projects in this one development. So as you can see, it's still quite a long space, and the space is actually quite functional. So it's been well set up to actually fit as much in that bathroom as they possibly can without compromising on space or functionality. Ensure all the floor plans are well dimensioned. Well dimensioned, I mean you're wanting the heights of your tapware set out, you're wanting that to line up. Obviously you can see here the tapware set out, the push plate and also the flush plate on the shower are all lined up. You want your height of your shower rows, so you have not walking in, your plumber's dropped at 200 mil accidentally. You've got the height of the shower rows set at least 2.1 to the bottom of the shower rows, not to your arm. There's normally a 90 mil drop from your shower head to your arm, so you're setting it from the bottom of the shower rows. In-wall cisterns and whatnot, they didn't have any recessed shaving cabinets or whatnot in this space because it was just a second ensuite. As you can see, we then go on to produce, this is called a white box or a 3D render. So once the plans have been developed and elevated, we then go on to create a white box which has no finishes on it. It just shows the client the layout of the room and a couple of different perspectives. This is really good for us as well for proportions and layout to make sure we've got everything right. We provide them with 1 to 2 options for their floor plan layout, but once we go into elevations, we only elevate the one design that's been signed off on. We then apply the finishes. So all these finishes and tapware selections and whatnot have been selected during the design process. Once a white box has been done, we can apply the finishes to give the client a really good visual of the space, of the overall look and feel. It's got the colour of the tapware, which is gunmetal, the tiles that we've actually chosen, and the appliances and the mirrors and in-wall system that's been chosen for the project. This is that job finished. As you can see, the white box render looking in from the master ensuite into the ensuite, and the 2 images there are actually the completed project. So when you look at the finishes applied to the render and then the completed project, it's very, very similar. So you're wanting to produce as much as you can, as close as possible to the finishes and fixtures in that room to give the client a really good idea and feel of the space. This is that bathroom completed. As you can see, it is a long, sort of narrow area. There's a shelf on the back wall, which is a little bit hard to see because we have used the one tile. We used a plain white matte tile on this wall, 1 to save some costs and 2 also to make the space look larger. And also there's a shelf on the back wall, the rail shower and the wall shower, undermount basins and the hob mixers. This is the downstairs bathroom of that duplex project. So the duplex project had 3 bathrooms. It had a powder room, downstairs bathroom and the main ensuite. This is a solid surface stone bath. As you can see, the strip drains at the back. This was a wet room where the shower and bath were included in the one room. It's really important when you're using a wet room, when you have a wet room design, that you create the fall of the tiles to the actual shower, like the waste. It's very hard when you're using a large format 1200 by 600 tile to get the fall right, but that comes down to your tiler and your plumber and your setter. You just need to make them aware of exactly what you're using in that space. This is a recently completed project. As you can see, there's no toilet in this space. This was quite a large space. The toilet is separate in the next room. So again, someone wanting to use the bath or the shower, you don't have someone knocking on the door applying makeup. You don't have someone knocking on the door wanting to use the toilet while you're in that space. This vanity, it's compressed a little bit to fit the photo in, but it is quite a large 2.1 vanity. It was designed, they have three teenage children, 2 of them girls, who wanted to be able to use this space at the one time to apply their makeup, which is why we've used the double bowl. On the left-hand side of the vanity, it's to the floor. One of these has a pull-out dirty clothes basket, so there's no need for a loose piece of dirty clothes basket in the actual room. All the power points are hidden either in the vanity or in the recessed shaving cabinet, so you don't have any loose cords hanging anywhere, and it leaves quite a minimal aesthetic to be able to pack everything up. This was the same home in the ensuite. The parents, the clients actually, she loved the aged brass finish, but she didn't want to use it throughout the rest of the home. The ensuite was set upstairs. It was its own identity. The master bedroom was a very, very calming aesthetic where she had aged brass desk lamps and whatnot, and she wanted to carry that finish into there. This is their forever home. They knew they wouldn't be changing it for quite a while, so she wanted to actually have the finish she preferred in there. So as you can see, you can mix and match your finishes, just not within the same room, or try not to mix them on the same level. Farmhouse project we recently completed. They had plenty of ample space, so the large freestanding bath. This was the master ensuite, again with your pin mixers, overhead storage for your shaving cabinet. This is the powder room, so you can see it's a smaller room, but it still has that continuity throughout the space, that you walk into one room and it still feels the same. Same tiles used throughout, large tile format. Kids' bathroom shower with the overhead and the rail shower and their niche. Another recent project which we recently finished, you can see in the last image, the toilet is actually hidden around the edge of that wall, that tiled wall. So again, no need to use anything overly, this was a master ensuite, nothing overly flash for an in-wall system. Save yourself some cost, put it towards your tapware and use your standard toilet in there if needed. Heated towel rails. That's another important point that needs to be taken into consideration with your design and your layout. You need to advise your electrician and your plumber immediately if you're wishing to use underfloor heating or heated towel rails, as these all need to be hardwired in. We've recently completed our own bathroom and put underfloor heating in. I never thought we'd use it. It was the best thing we've ever done, and it actually hasn't raised the electricity costs that much. The only thing I'm finding is my husband tends to leave his towel on the floor now to dry it instead of hanging it up. Best thing we've ever done. It really creates a nice warmth and ambience in the room. This is the powder room of that particular project. So as you can see, it just has a stone top for the vanity, undermount basin, not a lot of storage required, with some really nice ambient pendant lighting. This is another project where we've just finished. It's over 3 levels. It's an apartment project. This is the actual master ensuite. They wanted to use, this is gunmetal tapware. It looks a little bit black in this image, but they wanted a little bit more high-end finish for the level 3, which was the penthouse. The owner was keeping this property, so he wanted to create different finishes here opposed to level 1 and 2, which he was renting out or reselling. So in his bathroom, he's wanted a bit more of a moodier feel. We've created natural limestone. Returned it up for the splashback, and again your large overhead shaving cabinet for extra storage. This is the ground floor of that project, which had 2 apartments, both identical, but he wanted quite a lighter area sort of feel and aesthetic in that room. Solid surface basins, so integrated, very easy to clean. Wall shelf included there for your in-wall cistern, and just a slight Kit Kat tile at the back just to create a little bit of definition on that top shelf. This is a commercial project. We do a lot of commercial projects. This is a commercial project we just recently finished, which was a commercial environment. Your compact laminate, obviously your toilet partitions. As you can see, there's a shower there on a rail. This is the upstairs powder room, which is a little bit slightly different finish. Concrete basin for durability, but all in all, yeah, that's the difference where you don't have to, even though it's a commercial environment, it doesn't have to be sterile, and it just has to have the right finishes for that actual project for longevity. This was the KBDi tapware, so no matter what they were using in this bathroom for cleaning, it was all going to withstand the stand of time. So that completes our presentation. Yeah, so there you go. Thank you. I hope you've learnt something.
Now I'm on. That was amazing.
Oh, thank you, James.
I get so inspired watching your work. We're both up there. We've got Gavin Hepp, who's going to be up next. He's the Vice President of KBDi, and we're going, oh, she's good. Gosh, she's good. How was that?
It's good. Hopefully
Really
you
good.
learned something. It was informative, trying to give you some tips and hints.
What you need to realise when you're dealing with Tameka is you're dealing with a designer who can create great work. You can imagine that she was that annoying kid that was at school that the projects were perfect and a desk was neat. You know what I'm talking about. But that has flowed through to relationships. At the moment, Tameka, we're dealing with global issues. We're dealing with availability of products. We're dealing with delays. Mm-hmm. We're dealing with some things that I know I've spec'd on jobs, which was like 6 to 12 months ago, and now it's coming time to installation. It's not available. We need to reselect. Mm-hmm. It's about having the relationship with the client to be able to know that, you know, there's trust when you're passing that information on, and sometimes offering solutions.
And longevity, like we go into project consulting, which is really important, because by the time you've actually finished designing the plans and then you go, actually construction time starts, which has been delayed on many projects due to the weather this year with the rain and COVID and whatnot. Many things have changed. So if they haven't bought their tapware or if they haven't bought their tiles, that may no longer be available, or there may be a 6-week lead time and they're needing it sooner. So there's always going back and forth to find solutions. It's never really a problem, it's just a solution. And that with the price increases, one of the biggest things I find is the cost of the build is actually blowing out and becoming more and more that people are wanting to cut back on costs. And don't do that in your finishes when they've already been selected in your kitchens and bathrooms. They're the main element that people are going to see and your biggest investment in the home. So try, if you can, to cut back somewhere else where you're not going to see in the home or within the build. Speak to your builder and ask how you can have some valued engineering as to how you can save some costs that you don't have to cut back then on your finishes, just to try and stick within that allocated budget.
We know kitchens and bathrooms, you know, sell homes, but one of the things that we all have now is we collect so much stuff. Our son, 6'3", 18, I reckon he has so many aftershaves. He uses all of them at once. He smells like Chemist Warehouse. Where do we put all of those things? We end up with bench tops that are cluttered, and this idea of the mirror cabinet I have them in my studio. I have them at home. I love them.
Yeah.
You can have easy access to everything, but it's empty underneath on the bench top. But you create beautiful ones, because there are issues with when you get off the rack mirror cabinets.
Yeah, a lot of them are custom. There is the pre-made ones there, which you just have to make sure that you allocate when you're actually setting it out in your room, that you've got the depth and you have that on site as you're actually progressing through construction, so you can see that only on the specs or on the box isn't actually what is needed. What you need, that actual item on site. Another thing too is, you know, if you've got a beautiful bottle of perfume or Chanel or something, use that as a styling piece. The vanity doesn't have to be completely clear of clutter. You can use that as a beautiful styling piece, as long as it's not your bottle of Rexona or your Brut 33, or try and hide that away a little bit at a face height storage. It is really valuable to have face height storage, especially if you've hurt your back and you're not wanting to bend down and you've got face height storage for toothbrushes and whatnot. That's, really beneficial.
Have I got any questions at all for Tameka? We've definitely thrown a lot of information. Have you got any questions at all? Some people are reticent to ask a question in front of an audience. I don't know this word shy myself, but I know some people are. So as with each speaker, I will ask Tameka to come to the back of the room and you can gladly come and see her. I definitely recommend that you get details for Tameka if you're in the process of looking to build, renovate. And the least you should be doing for our presenters on here is to be following them on Instagram. It's free. It costs you nothing. And instead of all of that TikTok crazy dance stuff that you watch, that my kids seem to watch now, my partner does, frightening, you're going to get eye candy and inspirations from great designers to help you create spaces that you're going to live in. You know, our homes are our most expensive asset, and we want them to look great, but they have to be practical, don't they? One last point I'd like to make with you, Tameka, is the power of lighting. You know when I was a kid, we had a ceiling light. Dad changed it to an IXL light, fantastic thing. He took us outside and showed my twin brother and I the wheels spinning in the electric box. That's costing money. Don't leave it on. My brother would have it on in January and be singing in the shower. But lighting is something that is so important. It's changed so much over the time that we've been designing.
Yeah, and going back 5 or 10 years ago, the whole ceiling was full of downlights and they ran in a track and it was very, very polarizing. These days it's more about paring back with some more ambient lighting and using a warmer light throughout the actual home, but a cool white in the bathroom where you need it, that it's not creating that sort of warm yellowing effect. You're wanting that crisp white light as you're trying to put on your makeup. Sometimes it's not the most attractive lighting when you're looking down and you realise you've got a few more wrinkles and whatnot than what you had before.
That's that aged brass tapware that you were talking about.
Yes,
that
correct.
Aged
But another really important point is when it's really important, people think choosing a designer or working with a designer is quite a luxury or it's a big cost. It's actually not when you actually take into consideration how much work goes into the layout. You're not having to then change things that you've changed your mind on. It's all been set. Everyone has those plans to work off, so everyone works to that. So there's no real variations because not too much can go wrong. When going to choose your materials, and natural stone, that's one thing to consider. Always refer back to your designer as to what she may recommend or suggest. There is a reason why she's choosing a marble over a limestone for the durability or also the strength of that stone. So that's really important. These days, the amount of polished porcelains and finishes that you can get to mimic stone, it has a lot less functionality. It's still not a natural material, so sustainability isn't as good as a natural stone. We always try and use natural stone where possible, but there is more of an upkeep for your ceiling and whatnot. So just bear in mind that's where someone who has knowledge really comes into play.
Give you the best
when selecting
advice.
all those materials.
We love having you here on the main stage.
Thank you.
Please put your hands together for Tameka. We are very lucky to have her as a member of KBDi and also to come and speak here. As I said, you can follow her on, if you just check it out on Instagram. We're all stuck on this, but it's not trying to increase numbers. It's about giving you access to really good designers that are showing you things. There are a lot of people who create great looking spaces, but sometimes those shoes that look amazing, you can't walk in them, you can't dance in them, so they're not good. And it's the same with bathroom spaces and kitchens and the whole home, really. As I said, you can get details from Tameka. I'm going to ask you to pop up the back. I know people want to ask you questions.
Thank you for your time.
Thanks so
really
much.
appreciate it.